All right, well, because we talked about it, we jinxed it.
I was going to say, I didn't see it pop.
Unsupported GET request,
Okay,
even though it said the meeting was being live streamed.
these things happen.
Give it a try again, I guess. Oh, there, it's going live now.
Okay.
You see it? I don't see it.
Said it was going live. I have my screen up. And 7 people on.
And
Hi,
if
7
we're
people.
live, then they can hear y'all talking about it.
I know. All right, the video stopped now. Yeah, I think you were live. The video stopped now. Yeah, I think you were live. Oh.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Coach's Corner. Our coaches should be joining us here just a moment. Someone needs to mute their video on their end.
That was me.
But welcome, everybody. We have a potentially sensitive topic tonight that we're going to talk about, and that's how to coach a student through a meltdown. I know some of our coaches are going to share their experiences, as well as experiences they've had with their students. So it should be a good talk. If you have questions, input, your own stories to share, please put them in the Facebook comments, and we will get to as many of your questions as we can. We'd love to see your stories. But for now, I'm going to hand it off to His Grace Duke Brannos, and we can get started.
All right. Hi, everyone. So, like Saib said, we are kind of covering, we covered the mental side of fighting, but I think that was a little bit more around, going into fights and what you need to carry and where the mental state you're trying to get to. This is going to be talking a little bit more about what happens when you lose that. And when I mean by lose it, I mean, what happens when you lose control of your emotions. And, it's one of those really, we talk about it like it's a touchy subject, because anytime somebody loses control of their emotions, it's uncomfortable, and it's very uncomfortable for the individual who sometimes can't regain it very fast. Sometimes that can take the whole day, the week, a lifetime, sometimes even that bad. It can affect them. So, the trick here is we see high-end athletes falling into this place a lot. In fact, they say about 35% of top athletes, Olympians, professional sports players, have some sort of mental struggles, depression, mental breakdowns, withdrawal, all these types of things, because of the pressures that sport brings on them, and because of the pressure their friends, their followers, their coaches, their themselves put on themselves. And the trick here is many times most trainers and coaches don't cover that piece. They don't really talk about, we talk about the performance end and we talk about the training, But then we lose track of talking about how we manage our emotions. And when we get into that level of managing emotions, that's a tricky subject on its own as well, because emotions are fundamental. Everybody has them. And the idea is you have to be able to let them out. You can't hold them all, because in fact, that's what happens. A lot of people, you hold them too long and it goes downhill really fast. Tonight we're going to talk about a number of those things. I think we all have some experiences, and I'm hoping that this kind of covers some of the spaces where people feel uncomfortable sometimes, or around what they did, because that type of emotional breakdown sometimes can actually, many people leave the society, leave fighting, stop fighting because they're embarrassed or they just don't think they can do it. But we're hoping that we're going to cover some of that and really socialize it, because it's okay. It really is okay. Everybody runs through that. Sometimes you don't see it. Sometimes it's not outward bound, it's inward, and you won't see that. Sometimes it's outward. Now, throw a helm across the shield, throw your shield down, or whatever. Those are all signs of losing that emotional control. And that's the piece that we have to, that we're going to talk about tonight. So Tristan, why don't you go ahead and open us up a little bit?
Sounds good. I was kind of thrilled to get to this episode. I know that this topic is one we cooked up, or we discussed having an episode on months ago. And it's been kind of at the back of my head for some time. Not only from the standpoint of what is it like to go through a meltdown yourself, but being the first person, maybe you're the friend of the person that's having trouble, and you're the one on hand that you feel compelled, like you want to help them, and you don't know how, and you're not sure what you should say, or whether you should say anything, or you get in that awkward feeling of, somebody's struggling. I'm not talking about somebody bursting into tears and crying necessarily. I'm talking about you can sense somebody's being frustrated with what they're doing, what they're not doing. And I guess the first thing I would recommend is kind of the golden rule is try to know who you're coaching as well as you can. Don't try to guess what they're going through. Try to know them well enough. And any good coach will know their student because they've spent time with them. They understand what goes on in their mind, to try to help understand what the source of the frustration is, or what's causing, the stress. And that can be either the first two breakdowns I'd had were external stresses and then internal ones. The internal ones are, I should be performing better than I am. I know better than this. And basically the fighter's beating themselves up from just what's going on inside. And then of course the external ones are things like, I hate fighting this person. They always blow off my shots. They're a cheater. It sucks. I don't want to be here. And they're dealing with that external source, and they haven't figured out a good way to, I guess, put themselves at peace and say, okay, this is kind of not pleasant, but I'm just going to deal with it, and on I go. And so I guess the first thing I would launch it with is be ready to be compassionate and listen to what the person's going through as best you can. Of course, we can go on from there, but Bess, maybe you want to jump in and kind of lead off too.
Thanks. So I think one of the things that any good coach would need to know about their student is, when they're having issues, is now the time to ask. So if I've got somebody who's having an issue at a fight practice, maybe they can't articulate right now what their feelings are, or why they're feeling, or what's going on, because they're really caught up in their emotions. I learned this kind of like when guys get kicked in the balls or hit in the balls and they collapse to the ground, and you go rushing over to say, can I help you? And they're just like, leave me alone for now until I can recover. And I think in a lot of cases, it's like that for emotional or emotions too. And I think a lot of people don't realize what their emotions are until perhaps some time has passed. I know I myself am like that. I can be frustrated, I can be upset, but I don't always know what my trigger is. Why am I upset at this moment, at this time. I might know tomorrow. I might know in a couple of days. I need to think about things. So I think that, when you're using your words and you're asking somebody, can you tell me what's happening? What's bothering you right now? If they say, I don't know, I just need time, leave them alone and let them have the time. They might not know, or they may not be able to deal with their emotions well enough to communicate what their emotions are at this time. So that's my number one thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm dealing with somebody or myself who's having a little meltdown as the result of practice.
Mhm.
Brannos, if you're talking,
You're muted.
Good thing you guys are making sure I cover that. So and Bess, I think you nailed it on the head there. Is like being able to, the hardest part is figuring out how that person's feeling, because sometimes that person can't articulate themselves. They are so angry, or they're so lost in why they're even in the place they are. They may not even know where they are yet. Sometimes the key is they can't, you're 100% right, can't articulate themselves. But you have to go and you have to see if, first thing is, you don't want to yell at them for doing something that may have been inappropriate at the time. If that was throw something, if that was yell at somebody, as long as they remove themselves, that's a great start. The second piece of that is being calm, because the calm gives them time to relax their mind. And that's a big part of it, being able to relax your mind. You also have to be careful of leaving them. So you if they don't want you around, go stand 10 feet away somewhere, but keep an eye. Because again, they may not know exactly what they're doing yet. So they may get in another altercation because other people are bugging them or something to those effects, or they just can't leave the one thing that triggered them alone, and they go back to it. So, if you feel like they are absolutely angry and don't want anyone around them, separate yourself and give them time. Try to make sure that nobody else is bugging them, wave others off, and then reintroduce, or if you know somebody that they are very close to that can help calm them, find that person or send somebody to find that person to go and do that. Those people that, if you're that person that can help calm somebody, just sometimes the easiest way to be calm is just being there, sitting down on the ground with them, and not saying a word, letting them be the ones that find the words first for what they're thinking and share them. And then that slowly develops into a conversation. Soon, what you'll find in that conversation is they fall out of why they're angry into why did I do that? And that's actually even a worse place to be in, because this is the make or break point for a person. This could be the difference, between, those embarrassing places where people just can't even get through those. These are all hard subjects to talk about, and they're very difficult to get through. If you're not good at it, find somebody you do know that's good at it, that person may know. And that means that you may just bring them over, standing with you near them, and until that person's ready to talk, and that person can help that person through it. A counselor, somebody that, for many people, that has been people that are calming. Duke Rongwalder is very calming, and he'll ask questions from you that make you think calmly and then respond, and he gives you that time to fall into that, and he's okay if you don't. It's those kinds of things that you look for. That is how to, when you talk about reading a person, just make sure there's a lot of pieces that go into not only reading them. There's execution about getting them off, and then we go through that guilt process. They have to go through that, and then there's a resolution process at the end, and that is you have to be in a place to allow them to get past the guilt, and get past what they did through some method. And we'll talk about that later. So, I think most of us, a lot of us heard what happened in the Summer Olympics, with Simone Biles, and, there were, in fact, there were a number of athletes who did the same thing. And in fact, the previous Summer Olympics, it was the swimmer, I forget his name, but he actually had the same thing. There's Marvin Kimball, who was a tennis player, took a break as well. It was interesting. I was just digging through Simone Biles. She actually came back out and didn't participate, but she was handing chalk and water to her teammates. She was still being kind of the coach out there for her teammates, still being there for them. But she knew she had to withdraw from that to allow that stress to come off her, because she knew that there was so much there, she wasn't going to be able to perform. And not only that, she was going to break down. So there are times, and there's an example of withdrawing from something to make sure that you don't, essentially break down, and that you can continue later. So, we'll talk about, and we can go through a lot of professional athletes. There was another prime example of an athlete, and that was he's a boxer who was fighting for a title. It's Oliver McCall was fighting for the title against Lennox Lewis, and literally in the middle of the fight, or a little couple rounds in, he lost it. He had a mental breakdown in the ring. He would not go back to his corner. He was just walking around the ring. He was not putting his guard up half the time. He was not engaging with the boxer. It ended up taking the ref to stop the fight, because Lewis was even feeling bad throwing blows at him, because you could tell that he was not there. So, it's nothing to, these are real professionals, and they train, and they have people there for them doing this, and they break down like that. So, for non-professionals, it's going to happen. We see it with kids all the time. Well, guess what? We're in that same place. Even though it's amateur and not even an amateur sport, it's a hobby in some cases, but we all love that. We put a lot of time and effort into it, and we all want to get better at it. And those are all the ingredients to build, that emotional issue. All right, I'm rolling on. I'm going to go ahead. Tristan, there were a couple of questions. I think we
had a question come in real early. And by the way, thank you for jumping in with questions. We always love it when people comment and they have things they want to know, or they just share their ideas. But the question was, do you spend time learning about the conditions your students have to better help guide them? And went on to say that, for context, they're talking about a student that had complex post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They call it CPTSD. And I've found that this is true to what Brannos was saying a moment ago. If you think about Olympic athletes or professional athletes in their performance phase, like a boxer in the ring when he's doing his prize fight, you can imagine the extraordinary level of stress that goes on, that has all of that mental stuff wrapped up in it. But I've seen students have a meltdown on the mat in a normal martial art class. Like, you don't have to be in a high level competitive venue in order to feel mental stress or frustration, or you run into kind of something inside of you that you didn't know was there, and it suddenly comes out, and you're awash with emotions. It can happen regardless of how much stress there is. So what I would say is that I think any good coach, any good instructor, over time will get to know their student, because you're with them through that training, through those hours. You start to know what frustrates them, and when it starts to happen. Sometimes it'll surprise you every bit as much as it surprises them, that they're and this is something I will talk with almost every student about, and warn them that when you get into martial art training, you'll find out things about yourself you never knew. And you'll find, I'll just use the term demons, that you will face suddenly and unexpectedly. You'll get frustrated, and it'll, I don't want to use the term demons like it's a religious thing, but it's such that you'll get frustrated, like you turn on yourself. and you blame yourself for things that you think you should be doing right, or you hit a wall and you don't know how to get around it or under it or over it or through it. It's a very emotional experience, and I've seen people break down into tears, like I said, in a normal martial art class. Now, it doesn't happen often, but just beware that it can be that the student doesn't know why it's happening. So try not to be too hard on trying to dig in and find something that you want to understand when they can't even understand it. And so that's being that person who's on hand. And usually in a martial art class, the instructor is usually the first one there to try to, bring somebody kind of back from the edge, if you want to use that term. But yes, there is very much a factor that as you train somebody, you will get to know them. You'll start to know where they will run into their frustration wall and where those demons come up, and whether that's some sort of previous trauma from their past, could be even an emotional type, tackling their own stubbornness can be a major one. And that's where plateaus tend to come up when somebody is stubbornly holding on to a poor technique or poor execution, and they don't want to accept that there's a better way to do it, and they need to change their mind, and they get frustrated because they're not getting any better, but they have trouble reconciling the fact that it's themselves that's standing in their own way.
So Tristan, just real quick, you talk about frustration like that. I've seen that come out two different ways, right? Frustration is a strong emotion. So in men, that comes out, and I apologize, it's not all men, all women scenario here, because I've seen it both ways, by the way. But it tends to, and I think because of culture, in many men, it comes out in anger, and then they start really losing control. Because now they have this super strong emotion taking them over. In many women, that comes out in tears. And neither of those, again, it's a way to release, and both ways people feel bad. Is that what the same thing you see in martial arts as well?
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, one of the influences that I've seen consistently is expectation. And I ran into this myself with, I had my next door neighbor played a lot of disc golf, and he said, hey, you got to come and play disc golf. So for a couple of summers, we went and played disc golf. And for the first time, I'd get out there and I had zero expectation. I'm like, I just like walking around a park and being out in the sun, and it was great. And I'd chuck a disc and I'd go off in the bushes and I'd be hunting for it for, 10 minutes, but it was no big deal. But then as I started to be able to throw the disc pretty well, and I'd start getting, on the fairway, and I'd get a good drive and be like, okay, I can start doing this. Then I would chuck it into the woods and I'd start getting angry. Like, I know how to do this better. Now I'm screwing up. And that's where the frustration started to come in, when my expectation was at a certain point, but I was inconsistent. And that's where, I would get frustrated with myself. And then of course I had to, realize, okay, I'm just having fun. This is not worth getting worked up about. But that's how I had to battle the demon. And what brought it up was how high my own expectation of myself was.
Okay. Hey, Bess, you had something on this, and then there's a question that came in that I'd like you to cover as well. And it's what are the signs someone's reaching melting point that you're looking for, especially if if they don't act out openly?
So I'll
Good
answer
question.
I'll answer that question first. So earlier we are also asked if we get to know what some of the foibles, for lack of a better term, of each of the students that we work with. And to be clear, it's not like I've got a classroom full of people. I'm dealing with the same few people, generally speaking, at fight practice. At my fight practice, there is somebody who is neurodivergent, and I speak to them and I ask them, I check in ahead of time. How are you doing? How are you feeling now? By checking in ahead of time, I can be certain that they are doing okay. If they aren't, we can talk about it and sort of head it off. And I think that's super important. So that's what I would do. I do for that particular person. And then for the other people I know, we are good enough friends and I've known them long enough that I can recognize the signs of frustration. There's a tenseness in their body. There's an intensity in their face. And it's not a happy, good intensity. I want to fight. It's like, I'm trying really hard not to say something or not to throw something or possibly not to cry. And those are the things that I'm particularly looking for. After a fight, if I get the feeling that someone's feeling a little tense for whatever reason, routinely I walk off the side of the list with them and I just sit there and I talk to them. Hey, what'd you think? You did this great today. And how are you feeling? And what are you doing? And I think that's important. So that even if they're feeling terrific, we can elaborate on what went right, what maybe they could work on for the rest of the evening, that kind of thing. So those are the way I answer that question. I suppose others would have different answers, but I know I saw at least Brannos nodding a couple of times and Tristan once or twice. So I think I must be on the right track. One of the things that we've been talking about is frustration. And we talk about the fighters at our practice being frustrated, but we need to look below that. What is frustrating them? We don't always know, and we can't assume that we know what is frustrating the person. So, for example, I've been working on a new fight group, a new practice group for the last 13 months or so, and we're trying some new footwork that's new to everybody in the group, but new to me. And I'm mad, or not so much now, but at the time I'd be so mad, so frustrated because I couldn't freaking do it. And I'm a freaking knight, man. I've been fighting for 25 years. Why can't I do this? And I'd be mad. And I'd actually have to leave the practice early because I'd be so mad at myself. But so the question is, what was my trigger? I knew I was frustrated, but frustration comes from what? So the reality is, I was afraid of looking like a goof. I'm a knight, freaking royal peer, and I don't know how to do this stuff. And others are just going bibbidi bobbidi boo. And they're floating around like fairies and they don't have any problems with this stuff, that I was just about tripping over myself and a couple of times knocked myself on the floor as we were doing it. So what I really was afraid of being embarrassed. And that came across as frustration and anger. But I didn't really know that at the time until I talked to a couple of friends about it. And it's hard. If you're going to identify what your triggers are, you can't just say I'm mad or I'm frustrated. I was frustrated because I couldn't do the thing. That was true. But what I was really frustrated about, what I was really upset about, was I didn't want to look stupid. We've got some pretty great people of great renown teaching this course. And I've never mentioned who they are because I haven't wanted to, violate privacy or anything, but Brannos is leading it and Cy, his squire, is helping, and Duke Rongvalder is in there. And, these are legends within the society. And here I am falling over my feet and looking like a goober. And they're my friends. So now in front of the greats, I'm looking like a goober. In front of my friends, I'm looking like a goober. And I'm feeling stupid because I can't even do that. So if somebody had said to me, oh, Bess, it's okay, you'll get this, they wouldn't actually have been addressing the causes or the trigger for my frustration. So I know that's a long way of getting around to it, but when somebody is frustrated, let them tell you, talk to them, and really suss it out. Rongvalder is a good friend of mine, and he helps me figure out what my feelings are, because I'm very bad about figuring out. I'm usually just mad. And it actually works for me because frankly, I walk around walking my dogs going, screw you, me. I'm not going to let you not get you better. I'm doing this, which I realize is a little bit psychotic, but there you have it. When you live alone, these are the things that you do.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that later. That's an episode by itself.
So I have a trigger which causes a frustration because I had an expectation. And Tristan, this all ties back to, what was my expectation? My expectation was, quite frankly, that I would come in, I would be able to do it. I had an expectation, I wasn't able to do it. Then I felt stupid for a couple of reasons, which outwardly resulted in me looking mad.
Mhm.
So that, so I think learning triggers are big. So I'm going to turn it back over to you
Oh.
guys now.
No, actually, I think that was really good. And it falls into that part of the conversation that we probably need to go. And I've been watching, and first I'd like to thank everybody. I'm so happy we had this episode live tonight, because the conversation out there is great. I think the people talking out there are helping each other more than we're helping them. But hopefully we can help a little bit. Learning your triggers is a huge part of being able to manage your triggers. And that's what, so we teach people how to throw a blow and how to move and how to get into mindset and a flow and try to find this perfect fight. And there's nothing in there about failing. And that's the piece we have to make sure that we let them know that they're going to fail. In fact, it's important to fail. It's important to fail over and over and over again, because it's the best way to learn. If you fail and get mad, then you will not learn. If you fail and get emotional and not think about, well, what happened here? But that's not what you're thinking about when you get emotional. You're like, I'm so mad, or I just want to cry. You're not thinking about, hey, what did he do? Or what did she hit? How did she hit me in the leg? So you're losing an opportunity to become better. And that's as part of, as a coach, you want to make sure that your students and your students understand that really those times when you lose, it's you don't want them to say, hey, it's good that you're losing. It's not the truth, because you want to see progression. And they want to see progression, because if you're just constantly losing, that's all goes into a whole different anxiety piece. But it's okay to lose, especially against those who are better than you. And then you have to make sure that you find those places where you can win, so that you learn how to do that well as well. That confidence piece is part that allows you to control your emotions as well. So, helping your student, you can literally help your student just by saying, you're going to fail. And when you fail, let's talk about it. Write it down in a book. And then we're going to talk about what failed and how we can work on it. Because then when they fail, they're like, oh, I got something to go put in my book. And they write it in the book. And now they're not like, oh, I'm mad I failed. They're like, no, I found something. I got somebody there that's going to help me. Even if I can't figure it out, maybe they can help figure it out with me. So there's a way to get through, where when you tend to get emotional, you just don't know the way through, and you may not have somebody there to help you. You may have, you're driving yourself. So if a failure, a loss is letting go of everything that you just learned, or everything that somebody's teaching you. So as a coach, as a friend, find those times. It's like, hey, if you have a bad day, let's talk about it. I mean, Rumfelder and I do that still to this day. He'll look at me like, you all right? And I'm like, just not putting it together. And then we'll talk a few seconds, and we'll engage with each other. And then we'll maybe practice a few things just in the shadow boxing form, just to try to snap something back in place, snap that headspace back in place. So then we can go out there and perform. And there's lots of tournaments I've done that with Rumfelder. You'll get through the first 4 rounds and he's like, man, I'm just not in these fights. And then we'll go through that. I'll energize him a little bit to clear his mind of thought. And then he snaps in and he moves forward. So there's so much, when we talk mind, no mind, that's all great. But now we're talking about how to control our emotions and deal with those emotions during the fight, because that's what we're really talking about here. There's going to be times when that breaks down. Yes. And it's perfectly fine. Find somebody you trust. In fact, if it happens a lot, in other words, you're having trouble dealing with it, find somebody you trust that's around a lot and say, hey, do you mind if I come over and talk to you when I break down? Because you're going to find that those breakdowns really reduce in time when you have somebody in your corner that's willing to listen, willing to help you, willing to calm you. And that makes it much, much better. So So Bess, thanks for bringing that up. There was another question that I really liked when they posted it up.
But before we jump to that, could
yeah.
I jump in with one quick thing? And
Yeah, go ahead.
this goes back to the Known World Rattan Symposium that Sheridan hosted way back in like 2009.
Yeah,
and I saw Sean's class on essentially the process of improving your fighting. And the light bulb that went off as I heard him describe that, and I think we talked about this on some of our earlier episodes, was that once you look at improving your fighting as a process, like as a logical and reason-based assessment that constantly uses failure as input to adjust how you train so that you can improve. To me, that was the best way to articulate how to take somebody who's running into the emotional frustration wall and say, okay, once you've calmed the blood a little bit and kind of let that run its route, now let's go through this by the numbers. Let's treat learning like a process. You're not taking that your failure as a personal, indication of your own poor character. It's not that. It's here's just something or a set of things that need to be improved. Let's improve them. Let's work on training to improve it. And let's watch it improve as your training starts to get you better at that thing, whether it's footwork or setups, however that works. And I found if there was one thing that has been the most successful in helping calmly draw somebody out of that emotional state into, we have some work to do. We'll work on it. And when they feel the tangible input of let's figure out this problem, let's figure out how to solve it, it kind of puts off the emotional roller coaster ride and puts it into, let's just solve our problem and we'll take time. Doesn't need to happen this minute, but let's get started on it. And they like that work part. So I just wanted to add that in before we jump to the next question.
No, that was great. And that's exactly, I agree. Bess, you had a little bit more input on this, I think.
Yeah, Tristan, I really like what you had to say about there. And that is, I think, a super important thing for coaches to do is to be certain that we are adequately preparing our students' expectations so that we don't, so we say to them, this is going to be hard, or this is going to take a lot of learning. There's a video, I'm working on my hand-eye coordination right now, and there's a video I'm watching, and I think we can probably drop that into the Facebook link. And this guy's an MMA guy, and he just throws a tennis ball against the wall, and he says, do it 10 times, 10 times this hand, 10 times that hand. And he talks about it's going to go everywhere. And I have to admit, I went, 10 times. I can do this 10 times. This is not hard. Yeah, it turns out it's hard. But I was glad, and it helped me that he said 10 times, because for me, getting past 5, especially with my left hand, is incredibly difficult. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he started off saying just 10, when you can do 10 with, when you can do 10, then you go back and back, you make it, he explains how to make it more difficult. But that helped me with my expectations that, okay, 10 is good. And Tristan, I think that's where you were going, like, hey, let's look at your problem. Let's make a plan. Let's set out goals. And that way you're adjusting what somebody's expecting. So they're not walking in and they're not seeing a Brannos or a Rongvalder or a Sean or a Jade. I hope Jade's still fighting out in the West, and go, I've got to be like that. I've got to be like that, because that's an unrealistic expectation. It's unrealistic to think that you're automatically going to come in and suddenly be a great fighter without doing some more stuff. So I think, again, what you said was bang on.
And I just wanted to add one last little thing, and that is, I've noticed some people take longer to get out of that emotional meltdown stage, and that's okay. You can say, when you're ready, let's work on your plan. And what I've noticed dealing with students over an extended period of time, initially, they might take even a week or two to kind of come down. But once they come and you say, okay, now let's lay out your plan, and let's start working on it. And they see their progress. The next time they run into frustration, they won't take a whole week. They might take a day or two, because they want to get to the part that they start feeling the progress. And then it goes down to maybe an hour. And then the next time, maybe like 10 minutes. And then the next time, maybe like, all right, I'm really frustrated. Okay, let's get to the plan. Let's fix this. And it winds up minimizing that emotional impact.
Well, and actually that's the most important piece is, and we find this in, you know, jumping away from the mental breakdown piece for a sec. So what we're talking about is dealing with emotions. I can almost guarantee you emotionally, you can run, you can push yourself to perform better, but not for a long duration of time, because it's incredibly tiring. Mm-hmm. Where what you want to be is clear-minded and almost emotionless while you fight. In other words, I've been hit, and I'm like, especially me and Ron Golder, we trade this back and forth all the time. It's like he'll have a day and he'll hit me 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, oh, I gotta do something, and then I chase it, and then he beats the shit out of me, and then the next time I'm doing the same thing to him. And so you get hit, and you start chasing it after 1 or 2 fights. You're like, oh, I got to let it go back down to form. I got to just find and dive back into the form, dive back into my fight, and think it through just like normal. And it's not about him.
Not fight angry.
Yeah, it's not about him. It's about you. In other words, find your place where it's not about your opponent and having to do something. It's about finding your place and taking that emotion out of that, because that's where you're going to perform the best. And that's where you find that no minds piece. So what we're talking about, and Tristan, you're exactly right. These times, even when you have a breakdown, it's important for us to go back. And this is after you get through that initial part where we have to disengage, make sure they're separated from what's going on, to that place where they get a time to calm. And then the next place where they get that reverse piece where they start internalizing and blaming themselves and finding all the bad things in themselves, to the last piece of you have to give them a way out. You have to show that this is a learning experience as well, and that this is part of the whole place, and that, yes, that way out could be a number of ways. Penzic, I'll give you an example at Penzic. Gentleman that probably won every chivalry award all the time, right? And he fought really well this 30 years ago. He was at Penzic, and middle of a melee, he's hitting a guy on the back, on the ground. Never seen the guy do this before. Marshall pulls him, throws him into Marshall's court. I go into Marshall court, and I absolutely know what's going to happen to this guy. He is going to tear himself apart, because he lived in being a chivalrous 14th century knight. And literally, I went and I talked to those marshals. I'm like, they're like, we can see he's emotionally really unstable right now. We don't want to drop the hammer on him. I'm like, no, you're going to drop the hammer on him. And here's the things you're going to do. You're going to tell him he's standing out for the next fight. He's a marshal. He's going to marshal that fight. He's going to go and do other things so that he had things to do and penance to do so he can move forward. And then I walked out of the tent with him. I said, give me 10 right here. And then I said, you're going to give me 1 for every unit, every guy in our unit, because you disappointed them too. And he gave them to me. He stood up, he went back to camp, and everything was perfectly fine. He went on, did his job, paid his penance, and it was good. Now, if they would have slapped him on the back of the wrist and sent him home, he would have had to live with that guilt. And sometimes you have to give people a way out. So in the case where I was helping somebody try to get out of a breakdown, that case was, you're going to go apologize to the person. I don't even care that I don't even care that you're still mad at them. The way you act. Now, this was way after. In fact, I wasn't going to make them apologize at all if they didn't even, if they didn't want to go back into the site. In fact, at the beginning, they didn't. I was perfectly fine. Your day can be done. That's okay. I said, but let's sit here and let you calm more. And then after calming more, I said, let's just walk in and you're going to be with me. Nobody's going to talk to you. I'm going to tell everybody you're serving me right now. Leave you alone. And then after a little while, they got back with friends, and then they were engaged. And I said, here, now you're going to go apologize to that person. You're going to go apologize to every marshal in that list, right? And then we're going to talk about it more. And you know, this is a great learning experience, and we're going to work and make sure it's a good learning experience. And that's, you know, so you have to find that last way out. And that's a huge thing. We got a lot of stuff coming in. I want to make sure we cover this one. When you have a student that does manage to not melt down, but cannot accomplish the task and would melt down if they continue, how do you encourage them not to give up? So that's a hard one, you know, and it's funny because when you said, how do you encourage them not to give up on a task when maybe they're going to melt down on it? That goes two ways. So you have to make sure that you stabilize emotionally. You say, this is going to be very difficult. Getting through this task, I see, is going to be very difficult for you. It's okay to quit, but how about we try? Now, that last sentence could be, how do you encourage them to give up? In other words, maybe your day's done, right? And you have to make it okay. Say, you know what, you had a good day. You know, right now, you know, if you need to take just a little time off. Let's walk it out. Let's make sure we can go back in there, you know, with a clear mind. But if you can't, it may not be the best day to continue. You know, because you're not going to have, you know, emotionally, if you keep that emotion, you're not going to have good fights, and it's just going to compound. And I want you to have good fights next week. Right. So you have to give them an out either way. And I think that's really important. You know, what do you, Tristan, you have anything on that question?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on with everything in there. And I was just thinking a little bit on that question and how it relates to what you just talked about. Somebody else asked, at what point do you recommend that a coach try to help someone who is really in their own head with anger or sadness? And I think that kind of what you said about sit with them, get them out of the static that they're in the moment that's causing, you know, all the emotional floodgates to open up into a point where they can calm down, breathe. And this would be the very first thing that I think any coach really should understand, is that get them to breathe, get them to just take a few deep breaths. I heard a really great lecture from a professional speaker, and he said that they've done a number of psychological studies about why people smoke, and especially when they get nervous. And they said it wasn't the nicotine, it wasn't the smoking, it's the fact that they put it to their lips and take a nice deep breath in and out. And he said to anybody who gets that stage fright or that fear of going on stage and speaking in front of a bunch of people, just say, take a big, deep breath in and let it out. And just do that a couple of times, and it lowers the blood pressure. I mean, it does an amazing job for helping you gather yourself back together. So if you have somebody that's pretty nervous, and this kind of comes back to what Bess was talking about, where she watches the body language of somebody, like you can tell they don't move the way they normally do. They're usually breathing shallow, and it's hard to pin down when you see somebody do it, but you can tell their shoulders kind of cinch up a little bit, and they're not getting all the air in their lungs, and all that does is compound it changes their physiology and their mental thinking. Just remind them, start to breathe, relax, let the shoulders sink, and let that relaxation come. And that's often the first step among, you know, once you take them out, get them separated from whatever stimulus they have, and then get them breathing. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Tristan.
Yeah.
We've had, I want to address the other emotional questions that we've had, which is to say, the questions about crying when it's okay, and the questions about being mad. And I want to say two things about that. And we were talking about it earlier. Traditionally, Brannos said that women cry essentially and men get mad, because mad is an acceptable emotion for men, generally speaking, and crying is an acceptable emotion, generally speaking, for women. And I got to say, that sucks donkey balls, because here's the thing. If you're the kind of person who purges emotions through crying, man or woman, you ought to be able to do it. So while I understand, and I'm not going to say, oh yeah, just start crying in the middle of tourney, because if you're a guy, because emotions are fine. They should be, and it should be okay to express your emotions like that. But if anybody is overwhelmed enough to be mad or to cry, male or female, take yourselves off to one side and deal with it there. Personally, I don't cry. I get mad. Boy, do I get mad. And I'd rather, thinking about Brannos's example of somebody who was overwhelmed with emotion enough to start swinging on somebody on the ground, I'd rather remove myself from that situation. So I don't even give myself the opportunity to be a dick, because that's really what it boils down to. Chances are, if you're going to be mad, you're going to express it in some way. If I'm mad because of my opponent, or because of the marshals, or because that guy over there hit me in the face too hard, or something's not going well, the possibility exists that you may express yourself inappropriately, and that it'll behooves those of us who are in a chivalric society. With crying, a lot of people, male and female, feel embarrassed to be crying. And now you're all embarrassed because people saw me cry. So again, if you take yourself off to one side and deal with your emotions off to one side, you can put your back to people. If a friend comes over, you can, talk to them and cry. And again, you're not going to have to worry later on about, oh, geez, Louise, I cried in the middle of a tournament or an event or even a practice. So I would encourage you, if you're feeling overwhelmed, not to feel bad about your feelings, not to feel bad about your emotions. But in Brannos's example, the person then felt that they had to do penance because they acted on their emotions and they acted inappropriately. And I would encourage you not to put yourself, or not to allow yourself to be in that situation, or to follow the lead of somebody who takes you out of that. Brannos telling somebody, dude, I really think you're done for the day. Listen to the people who are not in your head at the same time as you are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I want to point out, it's unfortunate the anger piece is okay, because the crying piece is actually okay. The anger piece isn't. The anger piece tends not to actually work through the emotion, the bag internal. Actually, Cy wrote in the comments earlier what it does, but internally it doesn't allow you to release the stress, where crying actually does allow you to release the stress. And Bess, I think you nailed it. I think it's all right for men to be angry. It's not all right for women to be angry. That's the old school thinking of it. It's all right for women to cry. It's not all right for men to cry, which is a bunch of bullshit too. But we have to deal with that. That's life. That's the way, and I think cultures are changing, and hopefully later we don't have to deal with that, or at least our kids or whoever won't have to deal with it. But for right now, we're in it. I will tell you right now, and let's talk about this crying piece. I've had people cry with me in fights, and they're not crying because emotionally I hurt them. They're crying because emotionally they're frustrated, or they're internally mad, which leads to crying. And what's happening is the next phase of that is somebody stopping and trying to fix it, which is the absolute worst thing you can do.
Oh my God, don't make a big deal of it.
Yes, because then it just makes it worse. Yes.
Oh my God.
Okay, so everybody here, stop it. So the first thing you do is look at that person and say, would you like to continue? Because I can almost guarantee you that 90% of the time that they'll be like, yes. Okay. So, and that I just stopped to make sure there wasn't a scenario where they're crying because they're in pain, because I wanted to give them time to make their choice of, okay, I'm crying, I can't handle it, I want to leave right now. That's perfectly fine. I'm crying, I'll get through it. I want to keep fighting. That's perfectly fine. I just don't care. When I do care, though, and I'm going to throw this one out because I went through this a couple of years ago. Be careful if you find yourself as the one that's causing this all the time. So if you find yourself fighting some people and they're breaking down or they're getting angry constantly, you may be triggering them. So you may want to be very careful and look at yourself and make sure you're not the trigger. I literally had to go to, I had an event that I had 4 or 5 people cry after training them. And I went to my wife and I'm like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable here. And I need help because I can't go ask them. And I needed help to make sure that I wasn't the one triggering that, because if I was, I wanted to fix that myself. And the good part is I didn't need to. I actually, 2 of them caught me at the event. 3 of them caught me at dinner. And they were like, thank you for not making a big deal of it and continuing. And, you know, and a lot of times that just comes from, you know, me being truthful sometimes. And some of those people don't get that opportunity that, you know, everybody's kid gloving them. And so they never get an opportunity to, you know, get that hard truth sometimes, like, hey, you need to do this better. You know, or here's what's going on. And so be careful. It's like, oh, you're the greatest fighter. You're the greatest fighter. You're the greatest fighter. And they go out and they lose. And they're like, what? I was the greatest fighter. No, you weren't. You didn't fight anybody. Somebody told you were the greatest fighter. But it's so in your head that now you're frustrated, you're mad, you have all these emotions going. So be careful.
That expectation thing again.
Right back to the expectation thing, right? So my point on crying, big piece. It's okay. Let people do it. Just ask them, would you like to continue? Or, you know, just say, hey, you want to continue? If they say no, say, no problem. Just grab me if you want to, and let it go. And then move on. They'll easily get through it. They'll come back. They'll have the rest of the night. It'll be just a normal situation, and treat it that way, and reinforce to them that, hey, everything's good. So that's a big part of it. Anger on the other side, that's an issue that takes longer to deal with. Because
and it's good advice to lower the drama level, because it's easy to let that creep in. You know, to be so concerned and to let other people come and, you know, flood around somebody and their concern. And then that's when the drama level gets higher, and that creates its own set of problems.
Yes. Yeah. Anger is actually what I find is anger is harder because how fast people can fall into it, and the trigger is rough. And
it's hard to tell whether that anger is self-focused or externally focused. And when miscommunications and misunderstandings happen that way, now again, the drama level goes up.
Yeah. So just be aware, everybody. So I want to just cover something real quick. And it was interesting because I was looking at a document that talked about quadrants of emotion a little bit in professional players and things. One is it's like the first quadrant. I'll post up a graphic in a minute. Quadrant A is the breakthrough and resilience. And then what they talk about in that breakthrough and resilience is when that game is perfect and you're you know, that the flow is there, everything is there. There's no emotion, you know, that emotion piece isn't off. You're just flowing through a fight. Everything's perfect. And then you start getting into places when they start talking about, you start breaking down. In other words, there's cracks in what's happening, and you start chasing something, and emotionally those pieces start getting in, and they're small, and you find you're not having as much fun. You're getting depressed about fights and things like that because you're not winning. And you know, it's those little things, you know, you fail at a throw, you're like, I should have hit that, right? And that you start breaking down in those things, and that's the beginning. And you have to be careful, because you break down enough, if sooner or later, like, it just ain't worth it, I'm leaving. And this is really an important place where a coach can come in and say, hey, you're going to miss stuff, let's work on it, right? The next piece is withdrawal. And this is exactly what, like, Simone Biles did. She withdrew from the Olympics because she knew her headspace was going really bad. I mean, you know, you get into those spaces, and I mean, could go bad. I mean, when we talked about the boxer, he went to the hospital and and the psych ward, and you know, we start talking about people starting to hurt themselves and things like that, it was that bad, right? He's in the middle of a list with a championship heavyweight boxer that could literally kill him, and he's dropping his hands. I mean, and so, there was a place where he had to be saved by the ref. And so, you have to be really careful. He should have withdrawn, but he couldn't. And it's a mental cycle in boxing that's very difficult. But where Simone did that, and actually right after Simone and the tennis player did it, a lot of NFL players started doing it, and they were like, "Hey, I need this week off. I cannot handle this right now, and the stress is way over the top." And there's a lot of professional players it became okay to take a mental health day. Right? We have them at work. It started becoming okay. We have this idea in sports that we have to be mentally tough, and we do. There's a toughness in what we do, and especially on a professional level, there's a toughness you have to have a little bit, but it doesn't mean that you lead yourself down a line where you literally break down, and or meltdown, which is the last quadrant, and that is where you never come back. It's so bad that you disengage from everything, people, everything else. And that's when we're in a very dangerous situation. So, just give you a feel. And emotions are emotions. I really want to make sure everybody understands it's okay. It's part of life. You have them all the time. When internally, while we're doing sports and trying to excel and try to be good at something, we even put more pressure on us. So emotions are going to be there, and you're going to, if you hold them in too long, you could see what happens to people, and that's what happens to professional sports players. What do you think? Does that cover some of a lot of kind of the pieces, Tristan? On
yeah, and I want to let the listeners know that in preparation for this show, both Bess and Brannos found some really great articles on athletes and competitors that go through mental frustration issues, that have these frustration challenges and how to deal with them. And we are going to post those links up. We're mentioning some of the concepts here, but this is a pretty deep rabbit hole. I mean, you're getting deep into the human psyche. And so don't get the idea that just listening to what we're talking about here is going to give you a comprehensive formula of how to deal with it. It's some of the things that we've dealt with personally, but certainly the more you know and more you understand, the better handle you have on just how delicate this can be. And I've felt personally when I've been faced with it, like you're almost walking through a minefield, because you just don't know where to step. And one poor step can make the situation worse. And it's not like you are compelled not to go, because you do want to help somebody you care about. You want to try to help them find that calm again, because they're unsettled. And the comment about how do you spot somebody that they haven't outwardly started really showing that they're going through a meltdown. It's maybe mild, but if you know them, you'll start to sense that. And sometimes it's easier to intercept it before it becomes a big meltdown, to kind of guide them gently earlier, because you can see the path that they're headed on. Not to say you need to be manipulating your students or your friends, but when you have some empathy for them, you understand and can see when they're started to head, into a bad space or somewhere that's going to get them more frustrated. So yeah, I think that's like I said, we'll post those links. There's some YouTube videos, some articles. I don't suppose you need to go get a psychology degree in order to kind of have a bit of a handle of this, but it's good thing to think about, because I promise you, it will surprise you. You'll turn around sometime and suddenly there's this situation, and if you've not prepared for it, there you are at the edge of the minefield.
So, I'm going to just quote this one from Sai, who's posted in our little chat. She posted something from Fear is the Mind Killer. Building an emotionally safe environment for practicing physically dangerous things, and physically safe environment for practicing emotionally dangerous things. So, the idea is you go in and know that physically what you're doing could hurt you, but emotionally, you're comfortable knowing that people won't do that to you and that you're safe. And then the opposite way around, and this is the part that most people don't think about. Emotionally, you're in a space where it's overwhelming, but physically, maybe, those people are going to step back and not overwhelm you. And that's the big piece. So, and it's hard because, in professional sports, especially a field like boxing, and, you can't be nice. I mean, these people literally, most of them go out there expecting to kill the other person. They have no regard to that person. That person's it doesn't matter if it's boxing or MMA, they're in the ring. You're responsible for your own safety. And that safety comes via your training. Your secondary person responsible for that safety is the ref. And that is it. And your corner guy, he can throw in the towel. But, they go in there and it's not a safe place. The safety comes from you having a clear head so that you can make sure that you're safe and know when to stop. So I'm going to just talk, we talked about all these things, but, some things to help us improve those things, like improve one piece. They cover a few things here on helping control those emotions. One is improve focus and dealing with distractions. So, the idea there is that you focus on the fight and you don't let, external things first distract you, because that's important in a fight, but even internal things. So in other words, that person doesn't take a shot. Don't let that distract you. Because the more distractions you get like that, the easier it is to lose control of your emotions. Right? Grow confidence in athletes that have doubts. In other words, here's this is kind of my soapbox piece here. And I have a really hard time, and we have TOCs and things like that. The TOC wasn't there to make people fight knights. It's there so knights had a chance to fight you in lots of ways. They had a chance to work with you. They have a chance to physically fight you so that you can test your skills. And then they have a chance to let you compete at a level that's crown level, so you know what's going on. They offer all three of those places. And I think anybody can go to each of those. What I have a problem with is a lot of times as a new fighter, and I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm going to be bad about it. I apologize because I hate this. We are usually very excited because we don't get a lot of female fighters. When a female fighter comes, I know, Bess, you're giving me the head part. When they come in, all of a sudden they get a lot of attention, and everybody's trying to help them. And it's actually, and you got to be super careful, because in many ways you're hurting them. And that is, you need to give them a place where they can go compete. Because if you're just out there and they know you're not competing at a good level all the time, and that you can beat them whenever, they're never building confidence. They're never learning what their game is. So you got to be very careful on that. I have people, and by the way, this isn't just women. This is actually all new fighters, where it's like, hey, you're going to go fight that guy over there who's also brand new. He has 2 weeks on you. So go fight him. First day of practice, I have two people come in at the same time. I'm like, we watch, we make sure they have all their armor, and we're like, okay, go have fun. And we watch and we give them a break. That way emotionally, or, they can calm themselves, and then they do it again, and they can have fun. Right. And you have to give them that. And so by building that confidence, I tell you, confidence to me, people talk about winning crown, you need to build their confidence. Right. Because that's a huge piece of that. Developing coping skills to deal with setbacks. And this is that, piece we talked about earlier is find that when you fail and learn, okay, I didn't hit them. Why didn't I hit them? Not, I didn't hit them. God damn it. Right? You don't get nothing out of that. So I didn't hit them. I need to go hit that on the Pell 100 times for the next 3 weeks. Okay. Or I need to go look at that video and see why I didn't hit them. So, and there's a list of coping skills, and I'm just going to post them in the comments area. And I'll take a look at a couple more and see if they come up. But Tristan, do you have some coping skills that you train or teach or talk to people about?
This kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that process part. And I would, with the people that I would work with, because we were so process oriented, like we'd go to a tournament or something like that, and we'd kind of have our group of people and say, okay, well, who are you going to fight next? And they'd say who their opponent was. Like, okay, what do you know about them? What have you got in your mind for what you want to do? Is if you keep just having that process in their mind, it helps kind of curb that, oh my God, I'm facing a knight in the next round and I'm going to be totally outclassed and I don't know what to do. Like, well, okay, what have you seen of, how they've been fighting? Have you been watching? You involve them more in the study, the analysis, the forming an idea of what they want to do. You give their mind something productive to work on, not on just grinding out how, oh my gosh, I wish I was better prepared, or I haven't gone to practice enough in the last little while, and I can't believe how I got one-shotted the last time I was in armor and that sucked. And they just get on this rolling snowball down a mountain that just gets bigger and bigger. You get them into, all right, well, what are we working on today? Let's go. What is your strengths? How are you going to play to your strengths and take advantage of what you perceive as an opportunity? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And, actually, sorry, Bess, I'm going to steal a little bit of your time here. One thing, and I brought this up before, and one thing I do with some of my people is I say, give me 3 people that you do 50-50 with. I said, I don't care. You can go to events and you learn from people and you push yourself to some high level fights because that's good too. But I want those 50-50 people, and you're going to fight them every event. I don't even care if you tell them that, bad news, I'm going to be on you at every event. Right. And the goal for them is to try to be 60-40, and then try to be 70-30, and then try to be 80-20. And then you get to select new people. Right. And you climb that ladder, but you're competing and you're finding success, which builds confidence. And it's real success. It's not me saying, hey, go fight that, you've been fighting for 5 years, go fight the brand new guy. That's false success. Right. It's real success when you're fighting your peers. And this is shown in boxing, where a good manager will place you against people, and a good teacher will place you against people that will challenge you constantly, but won't destroy you. Because if you just get destroyed over and over again, you know what you're learning? How to be destroyed. That's the worst part, right? And there are cases where you can get past that. People who are very driven can work through those, but it's very difficult. Usually they quit first. So, Bess, you got something on that?
I do, actually. One of the things we've been focusing on tonight, rightly so, is because it's Coach's Corner, is what we as coaches can do for our students. How do we help them? But I would encourage the people who are listening here tonight, because I always like to give y'all a little bit of practical advice. When you're coming to practice, even if you don't tell anybody else, set up your own expectation in your own minds. Tonight, I'm going to work on X, or I'm going to work on Y. Every time I fight somebody at practice, I say, what are you working on today? And it is astonishing to me the number of people who go, nothing, I'm just fighting. So how do you judge your progress, or how do you judge if you're getting any better or worse if you don't really know what you're working on? I'm just doing everything. Well, nobody can do everything all the time, no matter what. So if if your coach is asking you, for example, earlier, how are you feeling? Or if you see, that's one way of doing it. But if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, or you notice yourself starting to feel a little frustrated, I would encourage you to step back and to look at your last fight, or the thing that's making you feel frustrated. So you can say, and you don't have to tell anybody, because sometimes, being honest is really hard. And sometimes the hardest way of being honest is with yourself is, I feel stupid because I was fighting a new kid and I didn't do anything and they one-shotted me in the head. Fuck. And now you're feeling stupid, but you got to admit to yourself that you're feeling embarrassed, or you've got to admit to yourself that you're feeling goofy, or, you got to admit to yourself, like, great, in front of Rongwald or in Brannos, I'm literally falling on the floor where everybody else is dancing around like a fairy and they don't have any problems.
You saying I'm a fairy?
I got nothing, man. I was joking. I'm like, damn it. Wait for Sunday, Brannos. Wait for Sunday. So it's not always like, yes, as coaches, we help, but we need you to help us help you. So I think that's just something I've lost it now, Brannos. So that's where I am right now. Thanks,
Well,
man.
here, I'm gonna throw something at you because there was a question. I think we answered a good bit of it, but here's a question for you. Why you get past calling me a fairy? Is there a fine line between cultivating confidence and setting an expectation? In other words, there's good that we should set expectations, and how that's managed. In other words, setting real expectations and developing confidence and not the false places. So, it's a fine line. What do you do for those? I kind of said what I do.
So for my own self, confidence for me comes from meeting the goals that I've achieved. So I don't sit there and be confident and set goals. I set my goals, I meet my goals, and then my confidence grows because I know I have achieved something. So we'll do something practical, like I was talking about the exercise, the hand-eye coordination, throwing a ball against the wall 10 times and catching it. I'm not started off being a smart ass thinking I could do 10, had my ass handed to me by a tennis ball and the wall, but now I can do 10 very easily. So I'm confident that my right hand can do 10. I am less confident that my left hand can do 10. So for me, confidence comes with achieving goals. So, for example, if I'm going to practice, my goal will be to, I don't know, take left legs, to maybe it's just to take a side step instead of walking backwards. Today, I'm going to focus. I'm only going to go right to see what I can do about going right. And then I'm like, hey, I can go right. I'm a right-handed mover guy. Okay, so now I'm moving right, and I'm confident now that I can go backwards and I can go right. So for me, confidence just doesn't come with, yeah, I can do everything because I'm, awesome sauce. It comes from having achieved goals, measurable, quantifiable, small goals sometimes, literally. And sometimes to achieve my goals, and you've seen it in Sundays, I'm the weird kid in the corner. Brannos and Cy, they're off there. They got a whole bunch of new exercises going. And I'm like, I'm still doing the thing we did 3 exercises ago. And I'm staring at my feet to make sure my feet know where they're going. And then eventually I catch up. And that's how it works for me. I need to take small baby steps. And sometimes I have to just trust that while right now I don't see the big picture, I don't see me overall improving, that baby steps actually do work. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves, Brannos, you were talking about boxers earlier. And I know that sports-wise, we are most like boxing. But when we look, for example, at some very fine athletes, let's look at baseball players. A baseball player who is very good misses 2/3 of the time. If your batting average is 300, you are an awesome batter. Like, man, people talk about you. 400s, I was Googling it earlier, 400s are pretty much impossible for anybody to get now. There were some people who batted 400 in the past, but equipment and stuff has changed. So imagine that. Imagine how they feel. They go up to the plate and, 3 out of 10 times they're going to be successful, but 7 out of 10 times they're not. And the world looks at them and says, you're brilliant. You are great. Here are millions and millions of dollars. Thanks for being terrific. 3 out of 10 times, 30%. Like, what? So I try to hold on to those kinds of things. I will also say, quite honestly, that sometimes my mind knows things, but my heart and my emotions have not yet accepted them. So, for example, if somebody says to me, oh, Bess, that was really great. You know, you did this and this and that. I'm like, yeah, I did those. But remember, they weren't as easy as I thought they should be. They should have been easier for me to do. So sometimes it takes a little while for what you know intellectually and what you know emotionally to be married. And so while you're being frustrated, at least if your coaches point out to you, I say something like, you're frustrated now because you've missed 3 leg shots, or you've been hit 3 times in a row in your legs, and the bruise is hurting and you're mad. But I've been watching, and actually you've blocked those the vast majority of the time. To trust that your coaches are telling you the truth and you're not focusing on the wrong thing emotionally, because you might be thinking, well, yeah, I blocked 10, but man, my leg hurts and I missed 3 times in a row. That is the incorrect thing to focus on. And it is really hard to redirect, but I would encourage you to do so. So there you go, Twinkle Toes. Back to you.
Tristan, do you have, I mean, how do you work with people? I mean, you know, it's the same thing goes, right? I mean, we're kind of short on time, but you know.
Yeah. And I'll just keep it short, but the huge thing comes back to that managing expectations, as well as helping them, because you, as a coach, sometimes you're compelled to say, well, let me impose what I think your expectations should be. But really those expectations will come from themselves, but you can guide somebody into saying, make sure your expectations are not too huge or too tiny. If they're too tiny, you'll just accomplish them and you think, this is no big deal. If they're too huge, you'll get depressed because you don't get there when you try to work on everything. And when you try to work on everything, you really get nothing. Yeah. And therefore you get frustrated. So to mentor somebody into that, to say, set reasonable goals and expectations for yourself and then make progress. I loved how Bess put that, by the way. And then the last thing I'll just put in is something that my instructor told me, because this is, I've had a number of my students in teaching Aikido will tell me this. So they'll watch me demonstrate and I'll describe, okay, here's what you should be trying to do. Here's how to do it. And they'll watch and they'll go, that looks easy. No problem. All right, come on over here, let's do it. And they go to do it and they don't even know where to put their feet, or they like, they'll come to me, how do you make this look so easy? And I can't do it. Like this, you've said it was simple. This is just, it's one step. And then I do one particular motion and it should be done. Why am I, and that's where their frustration comes. And I said, my instructor told me, and this is absolute gold, simple does not mean easy. Just because something looks simple, or even that it is simple, does not mean that you're automatically going to go do it. And I'm sure the tennis ball would tell you the same thing, so don't underestimate the difficulty of simple. In fact,
that was, you nailed it, man. I really like that, what you said.
Yep.
And I agree 100% on setting those, not letting people set too easy of a goal, but don't let them set too high of a goal, because either way you're shorting.
Keep the chunks edible. Then they say that's how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. Yeah. But make sure you can fit the bite in your mouth.
Yeah. And just kind of, we're 5 or 4 minutes away, so we're going to start wrapping up. But, one quick one, and this is a great way to kind of keep everybody in a good mental space where they can help and control their emotions a bit. And that is, I know I do it with my squires. In fact, for a while I did it with Rongalder, and that is have them give you 3 things that they think they can work on and 3 things that they did well or they were successful with. Because if they can give you both of those, that means they're thinking about their fight. Emotionally, they're not losing control, that they don't know what they're doing anymore. And even if they did, they can go back and look at video or go back, or you can help them say, well, here's what you did do. Rongalder beat 99% of the people, and then he'd be pissed off they'd lost to one, he got hit 3 times. And his practice was destroyed. He hated it. Next practice, he's even worse. And everything was negative. And finally I looked at him, I'm like, give me 3 things you did good every day. I don't want to hear the bad things. And everything turned around. His fighting actually got better again, and all of those pieces, because you look negative all the time, and then you just sink down into that emotional hole. So
you drew him off the emotional track onto the logical track.
You got it. And that's what the 3 good and the 3 I could do better things do for you. So even if you have trouble emotionally, do that. Write those things. It's easy. Hey, I hit this guy. I hit this shot I've been working on. I was able to hit this person in the head. I never do. I blocked this shot today. That was awesome. I didn't lose my shit. I don't care what it is. Give yourself 3 good things, and then say, I could do these things better. So when you go into the next practice, you have something to work on. So it's a good way to emotionally work through those things. Last piece I want to talk before we talk about next week's episode is just kind of round this out as, remember, you're not a robot. I mean, everybody has emotions, even the ones that don't show it. So it is just part of nature. So just let it be, and try to help others through it when they need help. Obviously, while you're having a breakdown, you'll never figure it out while you're falling apart. However, once you calm down, that's when you have the chance to start working through and figuring out how to get past those times, those breaking points. And it's all right. Be all right with it at the end. And if that means you have to pay penance because you were angry and threw something or whatever, or you need to go apologize, just go do it, because it releases all that inner guilt as well. These are the moments that you snap out of autopilot mode, and that, the idea in that phrase is, autopilot is we learn to perform at a specific level. When you get emotional, then you're not performing at that level anymore, and you have a lot less control over your fight. So always, the goal is to find that clarity in the fight and not let emotion swamp over it. You'll be a better fighter in the long run. And last piece is just everybody. And I've been watching the post. Everybody is just letting their everything out, and it's incredible. I love to watch, and that's a way to get past that as well and help others, and it feels good. And thank everybody here that came and did that with us, because I think it was great for everybody to see it, that we all struggle. Believe me, I can't even be Brannos the way other people believe, and I try to live to it, and I struggle when I can't, and that means I struggle all the time, because people expect this, and I perform here. So it is what it is. But just a reminder, you're not alone. Ronvalder struggles. I struggle. Uther struggles. Sean struggles. We all struggle. So you're not alone. And hopefully sessions like this and times that we can all get it out and make it normal will help everyone. So Tristan, did you bring up and know what's going on next week?
I did not.
What?
It's been a busy week. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what's going on next week then.
Yeah, you already know.
Yeah, it's
there you go.
So next week it's the East Part 2. So it's going to be good, because Part 1 was, and it's interesting because Part 1 was like all those old school guys, and it was some of the stuff back freeing cans and Craddock talking about stuff was just like, holy crap. Crowns going over multiple days. It was crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The good part on this next group is I know them all, so it's going to be cool. And the other even better part is the next one after that is the mid-realm, and I really look forward to hearing those.
Yeah, those are going to be great.
Yeah, so Al-Anon will have Part 2, Eastern Heroes and Traditions. So that should be great. Looking forward to that one. I hope everybody else is. I hope everybody was safe over the big snowstorm that covered the country. And thanks everybody for coming out. Bess, thank you. I love when you're on and we get to talk. So it's always a pleasure. And Tristan, we've been doing this for a long time, and thank you for
it's always
really
great
pulling us all together and making us do this, because it's really enjoyable, especially in these times when we still want to be here and talking fighting and thinking fighting
Absolutely.
and trying to be better at what we do. So
Mhm.
yeah, hopefully everybody feels that. So thanks everybody. And I'd like to say good night and be safe.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone. Have a good weekend.